Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. Please join me in welcoming our wonderful panel, Amy Lentz, Denequa Russell, and Morgan Williams. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you so much for being with us today. My name is Colby Nesbitt. I'm the principal people scientist at Lattice, and I'm here with a lovely panel who I'll introduce in just a minute. But first, I want to take a moment to ground us in why we're here having this conversation today. So over the past few years, the conversation around engagement has changed. During the Great Resignation and the war for talent, companies were hyper-focused on the employee experience and employee retention. And engagement was an easy sell. People all seem to appreciate and understand the importance of employee satisfaction and motivation and understand how that enables people to do their best work. But today, we're in a new phase where companies are hyper-focused now on efficiency and resilience. But that doesn't mean that engagement is any less important. In fact, it means it's more important because engagement isn't really about making people happy. It's deeper than that. It's about the meaning and purpose and fulfillment that we derive from our work, and that enables people to do their best work, to do more with less, and to adapt better to change. And so this is where the technology is really exciting because we have tools at our fingertips with AI and data analysis and visualization that we didn't have before. But technology alone isn't the answer. It's about how we leverage that technology to have a human conversation, to say, hey, we hear you, and then use that to leverage to drive change. Because the other thing is the trust between employees and employers is at a low point. And so engagement surveys aren't just about gathering data. It's about using that as an opportunity to have a conversation, to listen, to respond, and build trust. And so the companies who can do that with transparency and efficiency will really be the ones to thrive. So today, we're going to talk about how to set up an engagement program for success that you can glean meaningful insights from, how to translate those insights into language that will resonate with your audience, and how to use that to build accountability mechanisms to drive meaningful change. So with that, I'd like to introduce our wonderful panel. We have Amy Lentz, who is the Chief People Officer at TOMS and the founder of Hack Your HR. She's held key roles at Teach for America, in the White House under the Obama administration, and various startups advocating for people-centered leadership. We have Morgan Williams, who is the co-founder and CEO of Peak HR. She's an HR leader and entrepreneur who's worked across various industries and launched her own fractional venture. She combines her expertise in organizational psychology, compliance, employee relations, to champion diversity and shape high-performing organizations. And last but not least, we have Denequa Russell. Denequa is the Senior Manager of People and Culture at Brooklinen. She leads their performance management, engagement, talent development, and DEI initiatives, and is a champion of analytics, people management, and equitable development. So I'm so glad that they're here to speak with us about this topic. And now that we've set the stage for why engagement is so critical, let's dive into how to set up your program for success. And that's whether you're just starting out or whether you're looking to recalibrate to get to better outcomes. So we'll start with the big picture. How do you design an engagement survey program to make sure that you're gathering insights that can actually be used to drive meaningful action? Amy, let's start with you.
Thanks, Colby. I am thrilled to be here on this stage speaking about my love and the value that Lattice has provided. So, Chief People Officer at TOMS, when we implemented Lattice, we struggled to not only engage folks in taking an engagement survey, but trusting that their responses would actually be anonymous. And so I found that when you set something up, you first have to set up the foundation of trust. with your people. And so I took the opportunity at an all hands to say, hey everyone, I'm gonna share my screen and I'm gonna show you the beautiful interface on my end. This is what I am going to see. This is just how anonymous your responses will be. This is what we see on the back end. When you submit a question, I can't see who it actually is. And I don't have the budget to waste on a tool that's not doing what it's supposed to do. I would just use a Google survey and spice all the data myself if that was the case. So I think to your question, when you think about setting something up, I think it is laying that trust, but it's also speaking to people where they are. Hey, my goal is to engage you because then you'll be more productive and then we'll be more profitable. So that's one of my goals. So I think it's really level setting, but starting with being so explicit in what your goal is and then how you're gonna get there.
I love that. Just to tackle some other portions, I think the other thing is when you're thinking about designing an engagement survey, what are you actually trying, what are you seeking? Like, what are you looking for? You don't have to rinse and repeat the one from last year. Think about like pandemic years. If you're asking some of those questions, that may be triggering. So what are the results that you're actually thinking about? What are you trying to understand? And I think it's really important, if you're not gonna do something, don't ask the question. Like it's triggering for the employees on that side. And I think this is an opportunity for you to really get down into the information that you want to know. Think about your business priorities, what you're going for, and like how are we trying to get the engagement, or what does that look like on top of that psychological safety. And I think those are some of the things that get you the results you want, but also it navigates you in a clearer path instead of all these things that you actually really don't necessarily care about or need right now because you actually know what you're going to be doing in the next few steps.
That's good.
I love that, Morgan. The one thing I will add is I always like to keep in mind is that we're designing with the end in mind. And I love what you said about making sure that we're keeping our business priorities in mind when we're creating this, but making sure that the questions that we ask are aligned with not only our business priorities, but also what are our core values as an organization and how are we utilizing this tool to reinforce that. So if we're telling our team members that people management is important to us, what questions are we asking on this survey to reinforce that idea and to measure that going forward? So I think that's also really important, aligning our core values with what we're asking on these surveys.
I think those are all great tips, and I think it can be so easy to jump to the end or to the middle, as it were, to the survey itself and skip some of those really foundational parts about setting the stage, sharing your intention. You share with your employees, why are we doing this? Why are we spending time to do this that we could be doing something else? What's the value proposition? And then really building that trust. I think employees really react well when they understand how their responses are going to be used, and when they perceive that to be valued by the business, then they're more likely to participate and give honest feedback. I want to dig in a little more. Once you have the survey results, how do you make sure that you really understand the story that's underneath the data? Denequa, let's start with you.
Yeah, so I like to self-identify as a data girly. So I'm all about the analytics, and I think it's really important to understand that in any data project, which the engagement survey is, that your output is only as good as your input. So I say that to point out when you are setting yourself up to be able to cut and slice, the management of your data and your attributing is really key and really important. I always take the time before we launch any surveys to make sure that all of the attributes are really up to date. So everyone's gender identity, their age, their tenure, making sure we have all of this information. So I'm setting myself up for success to be able to look at the data a certain way. Another thing I think is really important is comments. They're really the unsung hero of the survey. It takes time to read through them all, but I think it's really important that we take the time as people partners to really dive in and get that context of why people are answering a certain way. It's not enough to know that they strongly agree or strongly disagree, but the why is what's really important and what's going to drive how we respond to those answers. So I think that's really important. And just like a layup to Lattice, they just recently launched their AI tool. In the past, I would be reading through 3,000 comments. Not that I don't love it, love hearing what everyone has to say, but it takes some time. So making sure that we are using our time wisely and leveraging the tools that we have, like AI, to really make sure that we're getting a really good picture of what the story is that the data is trying to tell us.
Morgan, anything to add?
Yeah, I do the same thing. What I would say is you're going to get a big picture of the data, but when you do start slicing and dicing between, female and male, when you start looking at the age, when you start looking at the tenure, it's going to start telling you very different stories. And so I really like to see that, because that's going to tell me the progression of the employees, the sentiment. Also, do we have like this outlier group that feels very different from the rest, and why? It allows me to start asking questions and to kind of create a thesis. And so I really do appreciate the slicing and dicing, and don't just look at the big picture. As many times as you can, you will see multiple stories throughout there. So definitely take advantage of that.
And I'll add to that. So we're hybrid. And when we did a full company-wide survey, we found that X percentage of staff were super dissatisfied with our hybrid setup. And I'm going, this is a really big percentage compared to all of the anecdotal feedback that we're getting. And then you look more into it, and it's one team. And I'm thinking, okay, let's now say, hey, everyone, this is what we've heard. Hey, department leader, what's going on? Why don't you think, first of all, do you think that it's not working? Okay, you don't, good. It's not just your whole team against, you and your experience. But I think to both of your points, it really does take not just let's check a box and send a survey and use, what works for other companies, but then doing the follow-up to really understand and ask why, and then how after that, and then what needs to be done.
I think that's so important, and there's so much data, and you can go to the ends of the earth analyzing it every which way, but gathering that context is so important. So I love that you all have highlighted that, whether it's from comments, whether it's from previewing results with a trusted partner, like an HRBP. Those are some of my go-tos whenever I'm analyzing data, and making sure that you gather that context to be able to bring back an insight that's actually meaningful. So we talked about how to set up the engagement program and how to distill some of the insights from that. But really, that's just the beginning. And the most important part, well, there are a couple most important parts, but one of them is getting the message through to the stakeholders who need to know the results. And so when we think about sharing the results of engagement surveys, we communicate them typically to our executives, to the managers who are on the ground, and to employees at large. So we're going to go through each of those audiences and talk about some of the misconceptions that can come up when you're communicating results, and how we can address those and speak to them directly so that we can really land the message of the survey. So I want to start with the executives, because that's typically the audience we begin with. And so Amy, I'm curious for you specifically, when you talk with other executives, what are the common misconceptions that you hear, and how do you speak to those?
Yeah, I think the biggest common misconception is that it's a microphone for dissatisfied employees. And yes, I think you can acknowledge, yes, you hear from folks that have constructive, very negative feedback. However, if you don't give attention to folks across the org that are really telling you what's working, you can't continue that work and double down on it. And so something that I found, Sarah earlier this morning said the research shows that you have 20% more productivity when you have a strong CEO-CPO relationship. And so what I do is partner with my CEO in saying, hey, let's look at each department leader that reports up into you, and how are they showing up in an effective way, and how are they missing the mark, and how can we attach engagement survey results and progress to their productivity and goals. So I have found, number one, at the executive level, you really grow that relationship and you get buy-in from your CEO. And I have found that the number one way to do that is to connect it to performance of your other executives and your VPs, et cetera. And I'll pause there, just thinking about time.
Yeah, Denequa, did you have a follow-up?
I think one common misconception that I think comes up a lot is where the accountability lives for these results. So while the engagement survey is a tool and an initiative that's driven from the people partners, the accountability and the responsibility extends far beyond our function. It is all of our leaders' responsibility, from our chief executives to our VPs to our directors to even our people managers to an extent. So I think that is something that is really important. And I love what you said about getting the buy-in with the results, because I think that is one way that we can kind of get beyond that confusion of where the accountability lives and really have that conversation about this is what we're seeing, this is where we're seeing it, and this is how we see us being able to impact this as partners, not just as a people function that is expected to do all of the legwork.
I think those are such key points, and I love the point that you made, Amy, about building in the accountability and how is this connected to rewards for leaders, because if it's not connected to the accountability mechanisms, it's not going to be a priority. That's just the reality. And if you don't have buy-in at that level, then maybe you need to ask questions like, is this the right thing to be doing with our time? And so that can really be a wake-up call to make sure that people's intention is in the right place and that expectation has been set.
I have one additional thought. I think, so I don't want to say so much of the time, but something that I've seen is when you have such a senior leader at the executive level and they are doing great work and they are ready for that promotion, some of the feedback that you might get from people is that they really are not showing up in people management and true leadership in an effective way. And then if you're not equipped with data to really back up a reason why you wouldn't promote someone, I have seen folks feel backed into a corner going, they're bringing results, we have to promote them because. And so I think when you have engagement survey data connected to the accountability in performance and talent reviews, you really can anchor, hey, you're doing great work, but I have to see this in the next 6 to 12 months. So it almost gives you license to say no, not yet, and then connect it to true, meaningful, actionable pieces of feedback in their people leadership approach.
And that's so powerful because I think historically HR hasn't wielded data to the same extent as other functions have, like finance or marketing or other analytical functions. And we have so much data that sit in our house and so much data that's powerful to tell a story, but it's so much more powerful in that form of a data story than it is as an anecdote that can be easily written off. Let's talk about managers next. There are some unique opportunities for managers to leverage engagement results because they're really on the ground, but there are also some challenges. I'm curious about the misconceptions and how you speak to those. Denequa, I know you had some thoughts about this.
I think this is a really good segue as you're talking about people management and how we can leverage this data to inform that. And I think a misconception with the managers is they're not super clear on what's expected of them through this process. I don't think it's clear to them that being able to have a highly engaged team is something that is a requirement of you as a people manager. So I think what's really important in clearing that misconception up is setting the expectations ahead of time before we kick off the process. I always like to be very upfront with not only the timeline of what's going to happen, when it's going to happen, but also what I expect from you as a people manager once you get these results. And how am I, as a business partner, supporting you to be able to gather, mine through your results, have the conversation with your team. I like to always provide as much tools and resources as possible because while I am a active support function, but I also am a strategic business partner. So how do I position you to have the conversation? How do I provide you with a plug and play deck? How do I provide you with frameworks for facilitating the conversation and understanding what these results mean to you? So I think that's really important as well.
I would say just one piece to add to that. We have to remember that managers are also contributing to this survey, but they're also getting results about them. And I think we have to acknowledge that. And when I say that, there's a lot of fear around this. There's, I'm being graded, I'm being rated. Like, what does this mean? And I think to go back to your point about psychological safety, I think that that's really key and important to say, hey, we're gonna have time to discuss this portion, but like we still have your org and the employees that report to you. We're going to handle this other side separately so that we can all be streamlined and focused without that fear or acting on the fear ahead of time. And so I think that when we can delineate some of those roles, it makes it very tactical for them to actually be focused on the thing that matters. And then we can go back from the performance aspect of the different things or promotability. But like right now we're thinking about you and your team and what are the goals that you've set forth for the quarter, year, or whatever the case may be.
I do want to add one thing along the line of clearing up that fear of like what this means for you. There are so many factors that impact results. So I think being clear with their people managers about internal and external factors that may be impacting what they're seeing. Could you be doing a better job as a people manager? Yes. Are there also other things that are informing how you're employees are answering these questions? Also, yes. So being able to remove that personal feeling a little bit and focus in on the data, I think would be really helpful as well.
And just as a follow-up, sometimes the results are really difficult for managers to hear.
Yeah.
How do you address that, and how do you equip them to go forward in a productive way? Morgan, I know you had some ideas about this.
Be transparent. I think we don't have to sugarcoat it. I think that only makes it sting more. If you know that there's a bad sentiment within your culture or department or whatever the case may be, call it out. We can say that. We can name it. And the way that if you continue to beat around the bush, people think that you're placating them or, different things are going on. And so say, hey, this is gonna suck, you know what I'm saying? And just be honest with it, but we're gonna get through it and we're gonna work it out. I want you to read this in this type of way, and this is the goal of what we're trying to get to acknowledge that feeling, to validate that feeling, even how they feel. This is going to be difficult, and I understand if you're gonna struggle with it. Name the feeling. I think too often we just act like those things don't exist. We're people. We'd like to be liked. Those are things that are going to allow them to handle the results better if we can kind of handhold them in that type of way emotionally.
I love that focus on really coming alongside managers and understanding that there may be some fear around this, and just naming that can be really powerful, and saying this isn't a referendum on you as a person, but this is information that you can use to get better, and here's how I'm gonna help you do that. Can be really powerful. Now, when we think about sharing results with employees, it's so important to have that moment where you share back, here's what we heard. Otherwise, it can feel like people took an engagement survey and they never heard anything after that, and then they're probably not going to take the next one. And so I wonder, when you all talk to employees about engagement surveys, what are some of the misconceptions that you hear from them, and how do you speak to that? Morgan, I'll go back to you.
We're not looking at this to fire you. I think that so many people think that we are reading these comments and going through and being like, this is the one. Absolutely not. I don't have the time for that. I don't have the money to pay for tools for that, and I don't care about that at this point. And so I think when we can kind of reiterate that, that is going to allow that psychological safety. And something I've personally done is say, hey, tell the truth. Be really honest in there, because a lot of times I'm going with anecdotal feedback that they've given me, and they're like, where's the data? I have it from this employee or this employee. And so I tell them, put that in there. Raw truth. I don't care what it is, because this is actually your time to speak to the executive team, because the results go up to the executives. So this allows me to advocate on your behalf. You don't like something? Put it in there. I can help change it, but just my words alone won't help me. So that allows them, one, to be a strategic partner with you. That gives the psychological safety, but I think the other part along with that just enforces we're actually trying to help you and to be a support function, but I need you to help me to help you. And I think when you can combine all of those things, it just allows us to really take the result and make something of it.
Mm-hmm. Amy, you had some good examples about how you shared back about specific issues to employees.
Yeah.
Can you share some of those?
Sure. So we poll folks across the company anonymously before we do all hands. We do all hands every couple months. And this last time, someone submitted a question, and I read it verbatim to everyone that was, in person, and then folks across the org virtually. And I read the question, and it essentially said, can we get more paid days off with some context? And I, with the mic, just said, no. Smile on my face. And here's why. We benchmarked against the Los Angeles, we're headquartered there. At Los Angeles, we benchmarked against our industry, so retail and footwear, and then we're a B Corp. And so as we compare, we're in the 90-something percentile. And so no, thank you for your question. This is what we are not going to be doing about it. And so I think, to your point on we want to be liked, I have found that as you build that trust I mentioned earlier, you simultaneously have to build that respect. And with kind eye contact and a kind tone of voice, you can be very clear and back it up again with data that you can get outside of your company. But I think it's just as important to follow up on what you are doing about something, and then make sure you don't shy away from not mentioning the feedback or the requests that you aren't going to do something about it, or just respond to that one person, but really address things, because I think in and of itself that does, again, increase trust, which increases engagement. And to your point, I have coached people, hey, can you put that in the survey? Let me help you craft the language. Okay, all of us, the language, and then I get the survey and I'm thinking, yes, okay, let me march right to my executives and say, this is what we're hearing. And then you keep that confidentiality, again, maintaining trust in representing anonymously, but you can have that confidential coaching in how they help you help them. Yeah.
Just something to even add on what you were saying kind of at the beginning of like saying the hard part. Say the hard part. I think too often we want to make these like seem so rosy and like it's perfect. It's not. Like, the more we can be honest about this, the more we can level set with our employees and also like say, validate your feelings, and I hear that and I see it. I think that that is key and core to some of this moment. We don't ask you to put all your time in this and then act like we didn't see any of that feedback. And I think that that's something we have to be comfortable admitting that, hey, we're falling way low on this, you know, whatever our priority is, or it's not hitting there, because it allows some trust that, hey, you asked me to do something, I did it, and now we're saying it publicly. And these are things we were going to do. I think the other part that I would just add to that, I like to be honest with employees. Like, a lot of people don't like change. And so you may want us to do a million things. If we did those, you would hate it here. Like, that's just the reality. You would hate it because every time we're implementing something, we're changing it. It's not a chance for you to get acclimated. And so I like to be real of the more, it's the loudest voice in the room. You know, so the more we can have that 80%, that 20, we're going to prioritize the 80%. So if you're just in the 20% or 10, 2, those are going to be the least prioritized things, which is also why I'm asking you to speak up so we can address those issues, because those are the ones that we're targeting. And I think when we can have that clarity, it allows, once again, people to show up and act accordingly.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's, oh, did you have something to add?
The one thing I was just going to say, I love what you said about the local and the global truth. And I think the reality of it is that employees have really high expectations of these surveys. They expect us to pull a rabbit out of the hat sometimes. And I think it's our position in this process to be very upfront about what we can and what we cannot do, and what we're going to do. And in doing that, I think when we're coming to the team with this is the results that we're seeing, this is the action plan that we have in place, I think the follow-up is how we are also communicating that action plan throughout the year, even beyond the survey, and being very transparent about things that need to be deprioritized because other things are important, and being very transparent about the fact that we are going to be addressing and prioritizing the 80% because that's the high impact thing that is going to move the needle, and just being very transparent and honest with the audience about that, I think will really help just clear up some of that misconception and again bring them along that journey with us.
I love some of the points that you all brought up around sharing. I think employees can misunderstand some of how companies use engagement surveys, and that's some of the work that you can do up front that we talked about at the beginning of level setting and setting expectations, but sometimes they see it as a suggestion box, and like you all said, we can't do everything, and we probably shouldn't. And so I really love that framework. I'm going to borrow that, Amy, of the here's what we heard, here's what we're going to do, here's what we're not going to do, and that's still more satisfying than not hearing an explanation or that your feedback was addressed. And so I think that can be a really powerful tool. So you all are talking about some of the getting into action planning. So I love that we're heading in this direction because really, if you do all this beautiful analysis and you communicate the story, that can make everybody feel good. But unless there's really action coming from it, there's not a lot of value in all the time that you've spent analyzing and communicating about the survey. And so I want to get really concrete to give some practical tips around how you actually get to a meaningful action plan. So I wonder, what are like the key steps in translating the engagement survey data, the story, into an action plan? And what role do you each and your stakeholders play in shaping that action plan? Let's start with you, Morgan.
Yeah, I think there's a few components of it. One, there's a global picture of what the business priorities are, and then there's the departmental functions. Once again, going into like slicing and dicing that data, this is why I like to do that, because we can have the global picture of where we're performing and where we're at, the sentiment of the employees from that stage. But okay, now let's look at department, and we may notice things like Amy was saying earlier about like hybrid environments. Okay, that's like really localized for this department. We actually don't need to do a big overhaul for everybody else because that's just this department. We can handle this, you know, in a subset, one-to-one, whatever the case may be. I think it's also, once again, kind of going back to what you said, Denequa, is who handles these things? Who is the stakeholder? And so some of the things that I like to use are like the RACI model. And I think that it can say, like, who is accountable for this? We heard this, but who's actually accountable for it? Because I don't want y'all looking at me. Like, I am helping to support you, but you own that day-to-day function. So how can I support you in this? And that way I can be your partner. And I think those are some of the ways that we look through this. On top of that, what's the employee sentiment? And I just continuously go down and down and down. That's where I start looking at our mission, vision, values. Like, how does that align in there? What is this telling us? What's the story? And that's, once again, the benefit of slicing and dicing the data. having a RACI to decide who's accountable so we know when the needle is moving or isn't moving. We can have a person, and it's not just the people team or the HR person. It's actually somebody that we've said, hey, this is your job to do and how we're going to speak about it, and I'm going to support you. Without having that conversation and set up front, it allows everything to honestly fall on you because there's no clarity. There's no conversation about it. And so that's something that I would challenge everybody of like being really clear who's the owner on this. Maybe a difficult conversation, but it's the right conversation so we can actually progress and know what we're doing.
Denequa, how have you engaged with different stakeholders on this?
Yeah, I think my first step always after I analyze the data, I pull together very pretty decks, I pull the story together, my first step is to get buy-in from our chief executives. And I think that's really important because they are the people that are driving this from the top. They are speaking about our business objectives all the time. They are speaking about our mission, vision, values. I also want them speaking about the engagement throughout the organization. And the purpose of that meeting when I sit down with them is to, one, get their buy-in, but two, the language that I'm using in there is all about how these engagement results are tied to our bottom line, how these engagement results are impacting our business objectives, because that's going to get them fired up. That's what they care about. And we want them to be excited and really passionate about the engagement survey results. So I think that's something that is really important, and it's always my first step. And I think I would highly recommend that people take that first step to get that buy-in, because now you have voices in the room that are also championing the thing that we as a people function care about.
Amy, anything to add?
Yeah, I will use an example, medical leave. So we started getting feedback in our engagement survey around how we could be more supportive of working parents. And we started, and it felt one-off, and then the next engagement survey, we heard it again. And sitting back with your team, you get all the data, and then you kind of reflect on it. We go, okay, let's do a follow-up survey. Let's survey everyone that's taken a medical leave, parental leave, maternity or paternity, over the last 3 years. Let's all of us kind of HRBPs and who has relationships with folks that may not take the survey, let's really try to get every single person that has taken a leave to opt into taking this optional follow-up survey. So we get the feedback. The SCIM had just released their hashtag Show Us Your Leave policies, and so globally we were able to look at what different leave policies looked like all over the world. And so armed with all this, we go, okay, how can we advocate how can I advocate to my CFO and my CEO that we really should offer an additional 4 weeks of paid leave to our existing policy? Okay, let's see what that would cost, and let's see what impact that would have, and what else did the survey show? Okay, so the rest of the team was negatively impacted. So can we offer interim support, and what would that cost? And so it was a lot of follow-up work for just a couple people to then tell a story, and leading with, this is my ask because this is what I've heard, and this is the lack of productivity that we're experiencing in these places. Oh, and also, you have to wait a year to qualify for medical leave benefits. But what our data shows in our recruiting and onboarding is that we have lost really high quality candidates that may have needed to take a medical leave before that 12-month mark. So actually, and then you tie a whole full picture of, if we offer this benefit, this is about how much it's going to cost, this is the value add that you're going to have, and it all starts with paying attention to the thousands of comments that AI helps become a little less than that. But I think it really is beyond what you said earlier. It's just a survey that gives us inputs, and then months later, it can really help with things as from the very beginning in recruiting. You don't even, that's just a one-off example, but I think it's not just the one survey, but then how can we follow up and get even more data to help us advocate, become well-informed advocates, and not just, oh, that's just what the people team wants to do. They're all about that, but really anchoring it back to the business goals and like you said, mission, vision, and values.
I think that's such a fantastic example because it's so practical, and it's a good reminder that you don't have to wait until the next engagement survey to ask about something. There are tools at your disposal that you can use in the interim where it may not make sense to wait a year to gather more information, especially if it's a certain group of folks. Maybe it's following up with a certain department or folks who have had a certain experience, but being able to tie that together then with recruiting data and other evidence is so powerful to then really, and benchmarking too, to really create change. I'm curious, as you all think about generating the action plans, then how do you make sure that the results are really sustainable and that it's built into the rhythm of the business in a way that doesn't get lost or feel like one extra thing that the people team is making you do? Denequa, you spoke about this.
I said this a little bit in the beginning, but I think it's really important to not only align your questions with your business objectives, but also those core values. And just a tactical way that I do that is after we're building our questions, I also make a keen focus on the themes of those questions. So how many questions are we asking about senior leadership? How many questions are we asking about our diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives? How many questions are really focused on people management? And using those themes, I really also layer in our values. So how are these tied? Am I missing a question that's going to address one of our values that is really important, that we're telling people is important, but they were maybe not asking the question or measuring it? So I think it's about the thread and that storytelling. If I've been telling you all year that collaboration is a core value here at our organization, if I've been telling you all year that you're going to be evaluated on how well you collaborate with your team members, am I also measuring that through our engagement survey? Am I also implementing actions that will support higher collaboration across our teams? So I think that's really important, is making sure that once you have your questions together, really doing a gut check with yourself and maybe even leveraging some of your key leaders in the organization to make sure that these questions that you're asking are going to be reinforcing and emphasizing the things that you tell them all throughout the year, your business objectives, your core values, and the things that are important to you as an organization.
Amy or Morgan, what have you all found to be effective here?
I would totally agree with everything that they both just said. I think it's really also being transparent, once again, going back to the change and the stuff and how you're going to use it. I think it's also reminding the employees when you do check those things off. I think we expect them to be like, oh, you recognize we did the thing you were asking about? They don't. So like, let's remind them that we're doing this, because it also shows the power that they have every time they show up for a survey, and that not only are we taking account of this, but we are doing it. And I think sometimes when you're in environments, you can't necessarily see all of the positive change and things like that happen. This is a great time to remind them, and all hands, of like, hey, you mentioned this, we did it. And so now we're moving on to the next task, because this gives that great feeling, honestly, and it also shows them you may not see everything we're doing all the time, but we are working towards it, I promise you. And this is a way to kind of double down on that, but also to make, once again, that psychological safety and to give the reason, like, this is why we're asking about it. If we don't provide that, it kind of just seems like we said we were gonna do this, we did an action plan, nobody's seen it. Did we do it? You know, and you probably did, but did you say it? And I think that's one of the areas where we can actually kind of stand up stronger and say that we actually did, you know, the things that we were going to do within the time frame and or before.
I think that's so powerful to repeat it back, because people do forget, and reinforcing that, hey, this is how we use it, and next time, if there's something that you're thinking about, you can share it and we'll take it into account, can be really powerful. Amy, I love the example you just gave, and I think that's such a good story to take home for our audience. And so I'd love to see, Morgan and Denequa, if you all have a story about how an engagement survey response or data story led to a meaningful change. Just briefly, I'd love to hear some examples that we can share with our audience.
Yeah, I had a very real one. It was about benefits, and I worked in an organization to where there was a corporate culture, and then there was also a retail culture. And so with that being said, the benefits are typically different for those groups. And I'm on the corporate side, but I represent and support the retail people. So I can vastly see this difference in a very different way. For me, it was very important to speak up onto this. So we talked about like our values and the things that we iterate as people. And I was one of the few that could kind of see the drastic difference. And so I really wanted to talk about that. I had one-to-ones of people that were constantly complaining and saying, you know, it's not fair. This is also during the pandemic, so my retail team was in person, which made it even more hard. With that being said, I was like, hey, I've got an engagement survey coming up, you know? And so put all your feedback in there. I don't care how harsh it is, like literally dump it in there. Tell me exactly what you want to tell me. This is your place. And I did this. I went over and over having the one-to-ones with the managers. I wanted them to do it. I didn't just want it to be the employees, because once again, when you're slicing and dicing the data, if the managers aren't saying it, then it's like, well, they're a subset. I wanted everybody to say it, because this is a really big mission. With that being said, I went up straight to the executive team, had all of the data, and luckily we were fortunate enough to get their benefits changed. I could never have done that myself, no matter how much I spoke or anything else about that. It was truly the data, and that's what I'm saying. Data is your friend. Let it empower you in the decisions, and it was really hard for the executive team to look at me and tell me something different when I have this stark thing that's saying there. Also, it's 80% of the group, so like, are we really gonna ignore this? And it got us to look into those things. What are the costs? What can we do? What actually is the retention? What's the benefit of this for recruiting or whatever the case may be? So remember, you're in a position of power is what I would tell you, and utilize that. If you constantly keep hearing something, tell them to put it in there and reinforce the reason why.
Totally. I can recall one piece of very thematic feedback that we got on one engagement survey, and it was all about our team members. And this goes back to the results are not always pretty. Sometimes you hear some things that are, not exactly what you want to hear from your employees. But one resounding piece of feedback is that the team members didn't feel like they were being acknowledged for their work. They didn't feel like the people were important to our business objectives. So this was, again, that 80% that was happening and what we were hearing. And our response to that was to launch one of our first rewards and recognition programs. And in building out this action plan for this program, and this is one of those things that was initiated with the people team, what we wanted to avoid is not doling out empty compliments. We want to give you a compliment that then helps you to continue this behavior and reinforce what it is that we, again, have been telling you is important. So in building that program, it was really important for us to make sure that it tied directly to our core values. And there is a reward for each value. And to talk about the data, I think something that was really insightful is being able to advocate for our team members and ask them what sort of prizes they wanted to be attached to this. So there was a follow-up survey to say, we heard you say that you want to be recognized. How would you like to be recognized? Do you want more time off? Is it a payroll bonus that you want? Do you want to go to dinner? And really using that and being able to advocate to our chief executives. And now we're in this space where people are working hybrid. Remote work is something that's really important. So using the data from also our initial survey as well as the follow-up survey to be able to say, this is what our team members want. This is how they want to see it happen. So I think that allowed us to build out a really good rewards and recognition program. And honestly, I just remember, the only thing I remember from the first ceremony is honestly the energy in the room and how excited people were. I don't think that I had ever heard our team members cheer so loudly in an all-hands meeting. Like they were felt like we were at a concert. So I think that was something that was really affirming for me and a really good thing to remember when we're talking about how we're using this data to really advocate for our people.
Mm-hmm. Well, I love hearing about those wins. I think those were such great examples. I know we're at time, so we're gonna just wrap up, but I just wanna say thank you to the panelists for those stories, all of the insights that you shared. I hope you walked away with some really great practical tips and good ideas about where to start or where to continue your journey with the engagement survey program. So thank you so much. Thank you.